Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of NaPoWriMo 2021. Writing a poem a day every day in April if you choose to do so, or just check this out at any time during the year. I have been seeing so many great prompts going around. Don't you all feel the poet energy just like crackling through cyberspace on Instagram, on Facebook, here on YouTube? Anyway, I have so many people are doing so many cool things throughout the month. I'll try and give a few shout outs to other people giving prompts. Right now, I know that the Poetry Lab on Instagram is giving some really good Insta prompts. So check that out. And I have one with them that'll come out later this month. Anyway, we are here today to do some writing together. So thanks for following along on this new little experiment. I've heard from a couple of you already that you've been writing to the prompts and enjoying them. So thank you for sharing that with me. And for anyone who's just tuning in, I'm just going to give you a prompt. I'm going to read a poem, and then at the end, talk a little bit about that poem and the poet. So here we go. Today, we are going to look at these are all poems that have influenced me because the title of this series is 30 Poems That Have Changed Me. So here is Maya Angelou's Still I Rise. So here we go. Still I rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room? Just like moons and just like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meanings of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear I rise, into a daybreak that's wondrously clear I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Okay. Every time I hear that poem, every time I read that poem, I just feel so buoyant and so triumphant. Anyway, I will talk more about the poem and the poet at the end, but I want to let you have your own reactions to the poem, and let's get into the prompt. So, day 3. NaPoWriMo. Here we go. Remember, you can stop and pause at any point that you want. Oh, let me read the writing mantra real quick. I forgot to grab it. I should have it memorized by now, but whatever. So, just a quick reminder as you get into writing mode, if this is helpful for you, just remember that you can say this as if you're saying it to yourself. I am here and present with my experiences. I am grounded and open. I have unlimited access to the infinite flow of creativity always around me. Whatever happens on these pages is what's meant to happen. I'm not judging myself or my writing, I'm just writing. I definitely have everything I need already to begin inside of me already. I am settling in and I'm ready to write. All right, here we go, folks. Okay, today I'm going to invite you to start with a free write. So I like to recommend around 5 minutes. You could do more, whatever, less. But I'm very interested in thinking about how this poem is addressing a particular you. A lot of poems do have the second person. But in this particular poem, I am drawn by the line. Um, there's a few lines, but one of them is, she asks, "Well, are you upset by my sassiness?" So who do you think Angela is addressing in her poem? Like, who's going to be upset by sassiness? And that's, you don't have to answer that, but just thinking about it for how I want to introduce this idea to you in your own personal life. We're not all going to get along as humans. People are going to trigger each other, sometimes innocently, sometimes maliciously, whatever. But imagine that something about you, a characteristic you have, something you do, some way of being you are, um, upsets somebody else. And you can take this in whatever direction you want, but what is that something that upsets somebody else? So you can think about a specific person who's upset by you, or you can think about a general sort of group of people or idea. But think about what it is and why does it upset them, and free write anything that comes to mind. I mean, I unless you are a saint and nothing you do or nothing about who you are upsets anybody else, and I know my audience, and that's not you. Y'all are loud and vocal and radiant, and anyway, just see where that goes and then pop back in when you're done. All right, welcome back. So, thinking about this idea of your relationship to other people and who you are, quick right here, just notes, brainstorms. What are things that you do well or characteristics about yourself that you like? So, these are positive qualities about yourself. And, whatever your state of mind is, find at least three things. You can do way more. Find at least three. It can be simple as, like, makes a good fried egg, or, sexy, kind, whatever it is for you. Make a good list. Just, go as long until you go until you feel like done, or until you feel like it. Then hop back in. All right, so this is a fun part with images, because what is poetry without images? For each of those items on your list you just did with the characteristics of yourself, now, and this is just first thought, best thought, free associate, first thing that comes to mind, like that Rorschach test, like what do you see? On each one of your items on your list, write down the first image that comes to mind. It doesn't have to make sense. This is where the fun of poetry comes in. It's just the subconscious giving you ideas. So, Maya Angelou, she has the sexiness, and oh gosh, I love this line, the diamonds in my thighs, or between my thighs. And here's just an example I thought of, like, if you're kind, oh, I was like balloon animals. I don't know why. Those are what come to mind. So do that for a couple minutes till you get an image for each one. All right, here we go. For the poem, put it all together. And you can do this in any way you want. Obviously, Angelou's poem had a refrain, it had a clear structure, and it had a clear rhythm and rhyme. You can model your poem after hers, absolutely, or not. It's up to you. So I'm going to invite you to write a poem addressed to someone who is upset by you. Again, it could be someone specific, could be general. Um, Write this poem as if you know who your audience is, who is upset by you. You're not really guessing, like, you have a good idea. But then, write it as if you know yourself very well and you're addressing them and what they think of you. Or, if this doesn't resonate, do anything else. Um, I always say, if you don't like the prompt, go back to the poem, see if you want to respond to anything in the poem or mimic any of the poet's style. Anyway, for this prompt, you can definitely just pull from what you just did, your brainstorm characteristics and images. Paint the picture. So don't forget those images. See if you can get those images in some way. And finally, you might want to have a refrain, like the refrain in Angelou's poem I think is extremely effective. You may or may not find a refrain, which is simply a repeating phrase to use. I'm thinking about what kind of a mantra maybe is on your mind these days. What do you repeat to yourself to give yourself a positive affirmation? If you do that sort of thing, if you don't, I highly recommend it. Um, so there is your prompt. Hope that is interesting. And go ahead and write. And then if you want to come back and chat a little bit about Maya Angelou, that's what we'll do next. Happy writing. Okay, well, hope you had a fruitful writing experience. I love this poem. I love this poem. I love this poem. And I will admit, I am not a scholar on Maya Angelou. I'm not really a scholar on any of these poets that I'm going to be talking about because they have all written so many books and are so accomplished across their lives that I'm just doing a quick skim. But let me tell you what I have learned about Maya Angelou, or what I already knew and what I think is interesting. So, first of all, Maya Angelou was born in 1928, died in 2014 at the age of 86. Okay, get this. She has 50 honorary degrees. Okay, that's a lot. Maya Angelou was an activist, and that was a big part of her work. In addition to being a writer, she was on two different presidential committees. She worked with Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights era, or we're still in a Civil Rights era, right? Civil rights hasn't ended the fight for civil rights. But anyway, she received the National Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama, which is the highest civilian honor. So amazingly, Maya Angelou actually has so many talents. Like, the more that I learn about these really famous artists and writers is that they are multi-talented. So Angelou was, bet you didn't know this, the first female Black director in Hollywood. Okay. Also a singer, dancer, actress, composer, like in addition to being like a awesome civil rights activist and writer. So that's how much creative energy is that? Like, that's a lot. And for someone who is so prolific and accomplished, I want to let you know, you might already know this, but Maya Angelou was mute for 5 years of her life. So when she was 7 years old, she was raped. And after she was raped, her uncles went and murdered the man who raped her, in revenge or whatever you want to call it. And she felt so guilty about that. The story goes that she just closed her throat and her voice for 5 years until she was 12 years old. And she got a really good teacher who helped her come back out into speaking. But what this impresses upon me is the power of language that supposedly she discovered the power of language really during this time when she was reading a lot as a child. And to me, it makes me think of the power of language when it's absent. We think about language as being sound and words, something that is there, but it makes me think of omission and what happens when something is not said and what happens in silence. In poetry, the white space and the pauses on the page can be as impactful as the words. So, for example, in the poem we looked at today, I rise, I rise, I rise. It's such a small and short, compact statement that has all this space around it. When you say it out loud, don't you hear a lot of spaciousness in it? So I thought that was interesting. And from that experience, Angelou wrote the very famous and award winning autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which I'll be honest, I have not read, but I feel like I want to and should. Um, Anyway, for any memoirists out there, I'm sure you know of Angelou, and if you don't, you probably want to check her out because she has a lot of autobiographies and was pretty influential to the time of in her time using like literary fiction techniques in her memoirs. So I want to bring attention to her civil rights activism because she, you may or may not know, was the inaugural poet at President Clinton's inauguration in 1993, which, by the way, is when Al Gore was vice president. Al Gore is one of my heroes in the environmental movement. And what strikes me is that she reads this poem called On the Pulse of Morning. And if you haven't listened to it, I'm going to put a link in the description. Definitely take 5 minutes and listen to it. Especially recently with our wonderful inaugural poet, Amanda Gorman. Just thinking about these two poets back to back, 1993, 2021, and the themes and the energy that I'm noticing in these videos and these poems strike me in different ways but somewhat similar ways. So what I think is interesting to share is that Maya Angelou got some criticism about not really being you know not really being like a technical poet. So she wrote a lot of other things, plays and novels and autobiographies. And she was sort of like pegged as more of a social justice poet than a poet of poetic virtue. And I think that, I mean, that's the same thing I'm hearing about Amanda Gorman. I've heard a lot of people, not in like my networks, but the critics are saying how her poem was not really very good or whatnot. And I think that's poppycock. And there's like very technical reasons and craft reasons that I can make the argument that both of these poets are phenomenal poets. And let's just imagine that maybe there are many ways of using language and different lexicons and different ways of being poetic. Like, I'm couching my words in niceties, but you don't have to write like an old white man to be a poet. Like, how about that? So shout out to all my women of color out there. Specifically, like, write however you want to write. I read this Maya Angelou poem over and over and over again, and it strikes me to my core. And I've been thinking lately how I think I have just even now found my audience. Like, I think I, as a writer, was trying to write to the people I thought I was supposed to write to, who are the people I had read for most of my life as a child, as a young adult, which is why, again, why we need like so many diverse voices and perspectives. Bringing it back to you, keep writing your own work. Anyway, I have gotten on a tangent about that. But the point is, you can be a social justice poet and a civil rights activist and be a poet of technical craft and quality. Like, I don't know why these two things are separated sometimes in people's minds. And even now, I feel like in the academic literary circles, sometimes like spoken word and slam poetry sort of gets the rep of being less technically proficient. Um, okay, anything in any genre can be technically proficient or not technically proficient, can be, you know, meaningful and impactful and emotional and resonating with a large audience, or not. So I don't know. I'm just gonna be like, let's throw all of those things out and just say Maya Angelou was a badass poet. So is Amanda Gorman. And like, let's be like intentionally anti-racist about how we talk about things like that. I'm learning like everyone, but let's just say I feel inspired by Maya Angelou's poem. I feel inspired by her life and her work. And I think that's what's important. What is the point of poetry if not to inspire and enliven and awaken something in the reader or listener through language? And clearly, Angelou's work resonates today. I mean, listen to her inaugural address or her inaugural poem, and you will notice, I notice themes of inclusivity and environmentalism and anti-racism and unity and advocating for, you know, science and intelligence and love. Like, these are all things that we still need to be sharing, thinking about, and reading and writing about today. So anyway, Maya Angelou is one of those poets who I feel, even though I have only read a select, not I haven't read everything in her body of work, but you know, she in her work is a rallying cry to action. I mean, isn't her poem that we've just read a rallying cry to own yourself? Like, be sassy, be sexy. Yeah, you're going to intimidate people because this world is changing. And the old paradigms, ooh, they change slowly, but they're changing. So let me just do a final quick little shout out, especially to the ladies, especially to people of color out there, and anyone who resonates with the idea of finding your voice and rising against adversity and claiming your identity, in a world that's gonna try and squash you down. Still I rise, still I rise, still I rise. So thank you for popping in and listening. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and rise and shine, everyone. Catch you on the next one.